truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Tuesday, May 14th, 2024, the 1,210th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening through a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can become a paid subscriber for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month. And in doing so, you will enjoy the ad-free experience. You will be able to participate in the conversation on Substack, and you will get access to the interactive live stream every Wednesday. And you will be an essential part of allowing me to devote the time to this that I do. But if you can't, or you simply don't want to continue listening to the show on Substack or a wide variety of podcast platforms, and of course, Rumble, all I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin, and you feel better about precious metals. I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company, and that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. Okay, so I began the episode yesterday with a little bit of a warning to everyone out there who gets upset when someone like me or my friend Patrick will approach a new topic, a new article, a new narrative storyline by first asserting that, hey, we should really examine this to see if it might be total bullshit right down to the roots before we commit ourselves to learning and then arguing about all the details of this potential fiction. People get very upset when we assert, hey, there's no reason to believe this. And the people transmitting this information to us are people who we know lie consistently, pathologically, and intentionally in an attempt to deceive us, to then exploit us, who are funded by and operating on behalf of some of the most powerful and most evil people to ever walk this earth. If I need to convince you about the pervasiveness of evil among the elite class, then this probably is not the right podcast for you. But let's consider the entire arena of public affairs and pop culture, the sorts of things that would be proactively communicated to us, not only the content transmitted to us and the production, the back end of that content, but also the underlying information upon which that content is based. Nearly all of that is generated by the subsidiaries of entities tied directly to the global regime and its governing bodies. Whether we're talking about politicians or academia or transnational corporations or NGOs, they're all working together on the same projects. No one objects to the idea that Operation Mockingbird was a real thing, that intelligence and law enforcement assets were placed among the media, operating undercover, just your news anchor with all the gravitas you could ever imagine. And that's what we're told we should want out of news anchors, gravitas, the sort of projection of seriousness that tells us this guy would never lie to us. Now, here's a word from Pfizer. This is where our information comes from. This is where our news comes from. Intel organizations, corporations, academia, whoever else, filters their version of a story through a news medium who trades on its seriousness and its gravitas, its reputation as a spreader of information. And what happens in these news organizations is that a press release they receive is essentially copied, pasted, and disseminated. And because that job is so mindless and does not require a journalist who has any background in the subject matter, they've basically cut out that middleman too. Now they just have AI analyze and summarize a news piece. They'll give that AI a cute name, and there will be a disclaimer down at the bottom. Jim Smith is the name of our next generation AI. But what matters is that these claims are simply given from an authoritative source linked to a given government or linked directly to the global regime and any number of its facets, to a series of media outlets who will then dutifully reprint what they were told and then disseminate it as if it was somehow vetted and verified. That immediately becomes the news. All the references in the news that say, yes, this news is true, are the experts at the organizations who submitted the press release in the first place. Anyone who disputes the story will be called a conspiracy theorist, and the general public will default to believing all of these news sources because they've all checked and they all agree that what's being said is true. And if there's any doubt, there will be follow-up stories published to make sure that everyone knows the consensus of experts agrees with the official story as it was from the beginning. And if any mistakes are made, they'll simply fix those mistakes in a way that protects the truth of the underlying reality as claimed in the original official story. Now, if you understand that this is the process, and you understand that the media organizations themselves are unreliable, and you then understand that the information being funneled into those media organizations comes from intel agencies, regime-aligned corporations, regime-aligned universities, the Defense Department, various oligarchs, foreign governments. I mean, the Trusted News Initiative was started by the BBC. The BBC is the UK's state media. And yet, for whatever reason, we still default to assuming that whatever they've told us must be true. Now, most of the people who consider themselves part of the truth community are used to being called a conspiracy theorist for exactly this reason. But it's funny because it doesn't stop many of the people in the truth community from calling other people conspiracy theorists for the same exact reason, because they're dissenting from these stories in a consistent fashion. And these people draw some arbitrary line as to where the questioning should stop. And because they don't want to go beyond that point, they make up various justifications for why the questioning should stop there. They'll say, well, that's a black hat psyop intended to make us look stupid. Really? What about the claim makes you look stupid? Can you not defend the claim? If you can't defend it and you're not willing to defend it, why are you expressing it as your belief? But if you do believe it and you are willing to stand up for it, why would you care if a stupid person thinks you're stupid? I really don't get this. I know we're supposed to devote all our energy to winning a real election that might not even happen, but we were way over 50% in 2020. If people don't want to come our direction over the course of these next 6 months and they want to dig their heels in on Joe Biden, what can you do but let them? I'm not going to stop learning and stop talking about things because I'm worried that their sensitivities might prevent them from pressing the right button on an iPad screen attached to a black box when the whole system as it stands is totally illegitimate. And if it is made legitimate, we're still only in a battle of narratives. I mean, it's cool. Don't get me wrong. For Democrats to come around. You know what's also cool? Establishment Republicans coming around, because those are the same thing. It's a uniparty. Are they figuring that out? Or are they just now mad at Democrats? My goal is not to make sure that everybody's good and mad at Democrats when they go in to press little buttons on the iPad screen. I want people to know what's been done to them and been done in their names so that they wake up and take an active role in helping to create the sort of society that wouldn't allow that sort of thing to happen again. And that sort of thing requires the humility that comes with understanding that in some sense, we've been wrong about basically everything we've ever believed. Now, that doesn't fully apply to everyone. I understand. I'm not suggesting other people have been wrong about all the things I've been wrong about, but we do have to be willing to consider it. We've been lied to about some awfully important things. It was just a few years they told us we were all going to die and we would all be murderers unless we obeyed them in every command they gave us, and they were provably lying. We were called conspiracy theorists. Some people on our side said, oh, I think you're going too far. And some people still say that when the existence of viruses that can be transmitted and cause illness is questioned, as if germ theory cannot be contested and debated. That subject is apparently off limits even to many truthers, because why? Is it dangerous? Is it dangerous for us to have that conversation? How would your life change? Would you just all of a sudden start running around eating feces and moldy cheese? It wouldn't change anything except for the perception of the threat that we are under. We would realize the threat is actually far more serious, and then we would take it seriously. And we would be less susceptible to the trickery of the people who are threatening us. And yet, for some reason, the conversation is off limits. How is that? There are a lot of people out there who claim to be on our side, who tell us that it is a dangerous conspiracy theory to claim consistently that Joe Biden did not actually receive 81 million real lawful American votes. They tell us that stupid people will think we're stupid. They'll tell us that the Democrats we need to win in the swing states will be put off by our position, and then we'll vote for Joe Biden again in a fake election that they seem to be willing to hand us, as far as Trump is concerned, as long as they can steal all those races down ballot. That would leave them in the sort of position they found themselves in at the end of 2016. They'll just find ways to delegitimize Trump and tie his administration up in lawfare, subvert him for another 4 years. And then at that point, the Uniparty will rise again. That's their best case scenario. They protect their election rigging infrastructure in that scenario. And because some people don't want to engage with what they see as the bleakness of that potential future, they'll instead ignore it which actually leaves us totally vulnerable to the worst case scenario. Now, is that out of fear or ignorance, or are they just doing the work of the enemy? And I'm more than happy to give someone the benefit of the doubt if they believe they are my ally, our allies generally. I don't want to come out swinging, thinking the worst of people, but you really do have to worry about a person who wants to control the conversation and cordon off certain conversations. Oh, you can't have these ones. Oh, you don't want to have these ones. These are black hat ops designed to make you look stupid in front of stupid people. Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much for that brilliant theory. I'm going to go ahead and just keep risking it. Thank you for your concern about how I look, guy. Or hey, you don't want to pursue those questions. Those are all distractions, you see. They're going to take you away from the real issue, which is making sure that we can win over enough voters in the middle, in those swing states. Maybe some black voters, maybe some brown voters, maybe some suburban moms, maybe even some young people. We've got to win them over, and one thing they don't want to hear about is any sort of threat to our democracy regarding election fraud, because that might make them think that there's going to be another very violent insurrection, and everybody knows that's very scary. We better not talk about any of this stuff. I'm just looking out for you, buddy. No, you're not. You're looking out for yourself. If you're scared of the conversation, all good. You don't have to engage all the conversations. That's just fine. If you feel like you have already let go of too much and you don't want to consider anything else, all good. I'm not trying to put you through some mental torment. If you've looked at something and you think there's nothing there and you sincerely don't agree, well, don't let me override your beliefs. Believe whatever it is you want. If you don't think something is convincing, then don't believe it. It's entirely within your own purview. But don't ask me to agree that you're right. I understand the aversion to exploring some pretty difficult topics, some things that people really don't talk about very much at all, if ever. Certainly not in polite conversation with a bunch of normies around. But why don't we do that? I mean, if we're worried about people who wore masks in their cars, thinking we're dumb for talking about whether or not the existence of viruses as a cause of disease has ever been proven, or our doubts about the preposterous claim that Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes, then what are we doing? How do we keep advancing? Everybody's got to go at his or her own pace. And I'm not trying to judge anyone for that or diminish the profound meaning that process has. But if you recognize that you're not able to go somewhere that someone else wants to go, don't try to hold them back so you feel comfortable. That means that everybody ends up staying behind. Those various issues that people are concerned to talk about, well, you can't possibly know that you're ultimately going to be right about those. Even if you think there's a very low probability that you're wrong, you have to recognize that there's some chance you're wrong. What if it turns out that that chance is 100%? Once you realize that you're wrong, you will be far less prepared to accept the new reality in front of you when that veil has dropped away. And we've confronted these things before. What does it mean if all the elections are selections and you have lived for years or decades potentially being governed, your life being shaped by illegitimate politicians serving an agenda that has nothing to do with you or anyone else who may have gone and voted for that politician? Well, that means our problems are a whole lot deeper than the results of one election or the state of the mainstream political conversation in the country. It means a lot of the problems being caused in society are intentional, or that they're just being allowed to persist for one reason or another, usually having to do with someone's grip on power. And how do we solve these problems if the elections aren't legitimate and we're not able to fix them through the system we formerly believed to be legitimate? People are quite content with the understanding that Trump won or Trump was robbed, and it was because of censorship, or it was because of mail-in ballots or ballot harvesting, or it's because states changed their laws for COVID, or because the Democrats had the right lawyers on their side. But people have learned their lesson. We'll just get Trump back in there. Everything will be just fine. We'll just keep on plowing ahead. Ron DeSantis, 2028. But they're not as comfortable thinking that the people in their state, in their county, in their town, on their school board or city council are also put there for the same reasons by the same people to push a different part of the same agenda. Because then the problem is a lot bigger. It's a lot more daunting. When you realize this, immediately, all of the ideas about how you might be able to contribute to changing society through the political system, those are obliterated. You realize the scope of your vulnerability is bigger than it was before. And that seems much scarier. But is it? I mean, if the system is intentionally corrupted, then we know that to actually solve anything, we need to try something new. Now, we lose the illusion that things might be solved quickly with one election. But how scary is it to think that we might just keep doing the same thing for another 3 decades while human liberty around the world is erased for 1,000 years? If viruses don't exist to the extent that they can be transmitted and cause disease, then the symptoms of sickness that people experience that are attributed to viruses would then be caused by something else. And we would then be uncertain about what that other thing is. And that's scary, not to have a replacement theory on what is happening to us. Because if we don't know what's happening to us, then we don't know how to solve it. But then again, throughout 2020, we were told that the coronavirus was a novel virus, and we had no idea what it could do. So we still had a totally unexplained and unexplainable phenomenon, but at least we had something to call it. Something to blame. Oh, you've got the COVID. That's why you're sick. It's not anything environmental. It's not the medical protocols. It's not that they need a cover story to lock everyone in their homes in order to crash the economy and necessitate the Great Reset agenda, Agenda 2030. No, all those authorities are just trying their best to save as many lives as possible and telling us the truth as far as they know it the whole time. But we all know that's not true. But for some reason, we don't want to let go of that part at the bottom, because that's when the scientists will tell us, hey, slow down. Who do you think you are, opining on the science? I don't see a little PhD after your name. You don't have the standing to question us. We said it's viruses. It's viruses. Now, what if the best and brightest people in the medical truth community have been silenced for the last 4 years by other truthers, and now we are less prepared to respond to the next pandemic narrative, which, by the way, is being rolled out right now for this bird flu? Donald Trump just put out a great video yesterday talking about how we will not comply with the lunatics on the left as they roll out the bird flu to steal another election. At least I think it was a Trump video. At this point, you have to at least consider that it was just a creation of AI. Now, can that pandemic narrative hoax actually sway enough people to empower the regime to lock businesses down again and try to enforce mask mandates and social distancing? Well, I doubt it. But I'd rather be sure. And we could have been sure if we didn't have people in the truth community shouting down all the people who were trying to alert everyone. Now, I don't know if they're right or not. I do know that everything I was told from the mainstream about COVID was a lie. I can look back at the history of viruses and see what the societal impact of the widespread acceptance of that theory has been. I can look at the wasted money that has gone toward that field of science. I can understand that we might have wasted 4 years in figuring out what else they might actually be doing to us. We might have completely eliminated one of their pillars of power, these various existential threats that the science has created, that they tell us about. Hey, if you don't obey us, one of these things is going to happen to you. It's going to be climate change. It's going to be a pandemic. It's going to be AI or nukes, or it'll be solar flares or whatever else. Those are all the real threats. Those are the real problems, not immigration or the endless printing of an unsustainable fiat currency, not the fact that Marxists have taken over the schools and universities, not that we're being manipulated every second of every day based on our own data in increasingly effective and increasingly more subtle ways, not that our air and food and water are poisoned. Nope, it's climate change and nukes and pandemics. These are the knives they keep at your throat. It's not better not to know. It's not better not to figure this stuff out. If you don't want to personally do it, you don't have to. I'm not claiming that is anyone's moral responsibility. Although for your own benefit, it's probably wise to consider where and when you might be wrong and maybe hedge a little bit, maybe toy with the idea a little bit to think about what you might do. For instance, I don't think that there's going to be an EMP attack that wipes out the electric grid and all comms for days or weeks on end, but I understand there's an outside chance of it. I understand that bad things could happen, even if only by accident. And because of that, maybe I take this or that small step to prepare. Maybe I get an emergency food supply for 2 weeks. Maybe I have a friend or a relative in some small country town where I can go if things in my city get crazy. That's not living my life in fear. That's just giving a few seconds, a few minutes thought to a potential low probability outcome that no one wants to engage, but would be far more devastating for whoever's given it no forethought and made no preparation. That's why it's worth considering that you might be wrong. The more important issue, the more you ignore it, the more devastating the consequences will be if you're wrong. And this applies pretty broadly, I would guess, about virtually everything. When I think about these things, I try to imagine what it would look like if I prepared myself in such a way that whether I was right or wrong, I'll have made it so that I can be comfortable with either situation. And I'm not sure if that's ultimately the right approach, but it's the one I take now. If we truly embrace how much of this world we've been deceived about and how much we don't know, then it's only prudent to consider what it looks like if we're wrong, no matter how unlikely we think it is, because we realize what we may have been deceived about. Think about the things in your life that you have had a great commitment to for a period of time and then have had to move on from for one reason or another, whether it's a belief system that you let go of in the process of your awakening, or you left a comfortable job that provided for you in order to take a risk and try your hand at something you've always wanted to do to see if you had what it takes to be successful. Moving on from a relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship or a friendship or a work partnership, that it outlived its usefulness and was just draining you. All of these things are upsetting. They can be jarring. They can be hurtful. And then as we move past them, as that hurt and discomfort subside, we move into a new phase of our life. And we realize, wow, this phase is so much better than that last phase. Those beliefs I had, the things that I was holding on to, those were actually the source of my discomfort because I had a psychological dependency on them, the same way that I might with an addiction. And it hurt an awful lot to let go of those things and to move on from those things, to put some separation between myself and those bad ideas or those bad habits. But now I'm clear on through to the other side. And while I don't ever want to go through that again, I'm ultimately glad it happened. I would guess that everyone listening to this has had that experience. We can totally remove it from anything having to do with the truth movement, or the corruption of government, or the corruption of the elites, or how the system and the country we were born into are not as we were told. And we can still understand how all of this applies to life, and how much better we are to know what it is we are actually dealing with. Verifiable information from Reality Prime, an assessment about what matters to us, about the way we live, about the world we might leave to our own children or grandchildren or loved ones, or even just in general. There are a whole lot of ideas that no one really wants to confront. The choice will be yours. And if you continue to choose, you'll eventually find out that there are far fewer certainties about this existence than you believed there to be. That's not something that becomes true at the moment you accept it. That's something that's already true whether or not you accept it. If you keep going, you quickly discover that more questions lie endlessly ahead. So yesterday we talked about some of the institutional forces and cultural forces that remain in place, prepared to protect particular mythologies, prepared to continue to obscure deeper, darker truths about reality. But those external influences, those gatekeepers, those people and organizations who say, we're going to stop the questioning right here. That's quite enough truth for you. Thank you very much for your interest, but there's nothing more for you to find out. From here on, you're just going to have to trust the experts, trust the scientists. You're not smart enough to understand things the way they do. Even if they let you check their work, you wouldn't be able to understand it. So what is even the point in checking? And all of those manipulations, all of that gatekeeping plays on and manipulates that thing we have inside, that fear we have of finding out that we are wrong about something crucial in a way that's really going to set us back in our understanding. We have entirely ignored something, and in doing so, we have increased the cost and the impact of eventually being proven wrong because we didn't bother considering what it would be like if we just happened to be wrong about something we would admit we don't know for sure. And so yesterday we were talking about the beautiful skies over the weekend, all of these auroras that were seen in very distant parts of the world. Were they caused by the sun farting in our general direction? Were they caused by various dual-use military/civilian scientific research centers that have the ability to transmit energy and communications, sound, voices, images via radio frequencies? And oh yeah, they can also heat the sky, the ionosphere, but they cannot manipulate weather. That part is a conspiracy theory, even though they've been doing it for the last 50 or so years. And if you think that manipulating the weather is a good idea, by the way, then it's not a conspiracy theory. Then it's just the science that's been around for like 75 years. It's just true. And it just goes to show the brilliance of scientists and the importance of the institution of the science. But if you think it's a bad idea that they're manipulating weather or they're using it for that more military use and not necessarily for our benefit, then it's a conspiracy theory. You see, the conspiracy theory part is to believe that the people with the most power and wealth and status in the world who have an agenda that is in explicit opposition to our good might actually be up to something bad. And so, as I discussed yesterday, I'm generally interested in people's feedback when they approach me with respect and sincerity and good faith. I think that's a pretty simple standard to meet if I'm going to spend my time on the concerns of a stranger. I would expect anyone to have some sort of standard like that. I mean, we are in a situation where you don't even know if the person talking to you online is a person. Could easily be an AI. It could be a bot. It could be someone who is not honestly representing who they are and what they believe. We're in an information war. But still, I want feedback. I want feedback from real people, which means I have to listen to real people, which means sometimes real people won't agree with me. And I understand that sometimes people just want to hear about the fake Trump trials or the fake Ukraine war, or the next fake pandemic hoax, or the next fake election. And they want to hear about all those things as if they're all real, the way the people on TV talk about them. Because if I'm not talking about them as though they're real, and I'm just saying, hey, yeah, those things are fake, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on those, then I'm somehow not taking seriously the things that are happening in the real world. But I am taking them seriously to the extent that they're happening. And that usually consists only in encountering them as stories because that's all they are. If you're told that something is happening in the world and that thing is not actually happening, then me talking about that story is not me talking about something that is actually happening in the world. That is me refusing to talk about something that isn't actually happening in the real world, while other people are spending their time learning, discussing, and arguing about the details of a complete and total fiction. And because there's no specific way to actually know if what you're being told about is an event drawn from reality prime that we are being told about in a way that is real and representative of that event, then we need other ways to process new information. And we have to be able to prioritize what actually matters out of all the information that's coming in. In the first episode of this year, I talked about how we were not going to focus on all of the day-to-day issues and controversies sprinkled throughout the mainstream media each and every day. We're going to talk about election integrity. We're going to talk about the financial collapse and what that means. We're going to talk about the state of the info war. We're going to talk about geopolitics and God and philosophy. And sometimes we are going to discuss those issues in the context of day-to-day politics. The idea is to skip past all of the nonsense and deal with the elements of the central narrative that we understand we cannot fully avoid. We live in a society where we interact with other people who are under the sway of a total inversion within the false reality. They are entirely invested in perceiving the world through a total acceptance of the central narrative. Everything they believe about the world, about the universe, about the meaning of existence, all of it exists within the confines of that central narrative. Everything they know, every opinion they might express, all of it has been approved at some point by the authoritative sources. They wear the right clothes, they eat the right foods, they listen to the right music, they watch the right Netflix shows, they have the right jobs, they vote the right way, and on and on and on. We will eventually encounter people like that, and that's the extreme version. There are obviously people who experience this to lower degrees. But even with people who are already awake and headed in our direction quickly, we still want to retain the ability to view and understand the way they view and understand the world so that we can have successful and productive interactions. But we don't need each and every granular detail if we know the thing's not real or have a pretty strong suspicion. Like, let's take a few weeks ago when we were told that a man who was, I guess, some kind of radical populist or something, somebody that realized the government was terrible just a little bit too hard. Well, he went down to Trump's trial that was surrounded by essentially all the police in New York. That's why none of them were able to make it up to Columbia University to put down the very, very real, quote unquote, pro-Hamas protests on all these different colleges. Were the protesters college kids? No, they mostly weren't. And hey, look at that. The frat boys are saving the day, walking out and taking pictures in front of a bunch of college communists. Well, that's almost just like Iwo Jima. Let's send around the homoerotic propaganda. But let's not bother discussing why paid and organized protesters are welcome to do what they do on all of these college campuses rather than going out and hitting the streets. Why aren't we concerned that the obvious reaction to the distastefulness of these protesters is for people to then promote more war in Gaza? We're being shown these radical uniparty leftists supporting Hamas, and then on the other side, we've got the uniparty right supporting Israel. And all of the uniparty agrees that we need to support Israel with more money so there can be more war. And just like that, the controlled opposition dynamic has succeeded again. What do you mean, bro? You don't want to send more money to Israel? What are you, on the side of these college protesters? Oh, you're some kind of conservative. That's what we get from the Ron DeSantis op, from all those establishment Republicans who've been anti-Trump for 9 years, who didn't bother recognizing that there's no way Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes. You follow their news day to day. You invest yourself in the details of their fictions, and you will find yourself right back to supporting everything they wanted you to support the whole time. I mean, what are you going to side with the paragliding go-karters? But Trump took advantage. He knew that the police were there all around his trial in Manhattan, and that's why they couldn't get up and stop those protesters in Columbia. And he messaged that and messaged that and messaged that to point out the hypocrisy. The truth is, it doesn't matter what was going on in Columbia or whether or not the police could get there or not, based on the fact that they were all protecting Donald Trump's trial. But we were told that despite all that, some guy that understood how illegitimate and corrupt the government was just a little bit too hard was able to make his way through all of those police and then set himself on fire in front of the court. For an entire weekend, people dug into the details of this young man's life, and they read his manifesto all the way through so they could see the situation through his eyes. And sure, he knew plenty of professional politicians and also some social media influencers. But I guess he was just radicalized. He realized the government was evil just a little bit too hard. And he thought, well, the only way to solve this, I'm going to evade all of the police in New York and then set myself on fire in front of the Trump trial. Now, no one stopped him until everyone filmed him first. And then when they went to put him in the ambulance and take him away, they basically just picked him up by his wrists and his ankles, flopped his limp body onto a stretcher, stuffed him in the ambulance all green and gray, and then eventually, according to politician acquaintance of this man, Tom Suozzi, a guy who just quote-unquote won a special election in Long Island, announced that this young radical had succumbed to his wounds. Now, how long should we spend on this story? Is there a detail at the very bottom of it that might expose the whole thing? It might get all the way down to the dark beating heart of this evil monster? Nah, probably not. Underneath, there is probably as much bullshit as there is right there on the surface. So how much attention am I responsible for giving to this thing? Hours? A day? Weeks? Should we still be digging on this man whose name I didn't even bother learning because it doesn't matter? As far as I knew, this man did not exist. Then all of a sudden, it was deemed that he did exist, long enough at least to evade every policeman in New York, make his way right in front of the courtroom that was hosting the fake Trump trial, and set himself on fire. And a little while after that, he didn't exist anymore. Was it symbolic? Was it comms? I don't know. Was every bit of it computer generated? I have no idea. Was this man's past, to the extent that it exists on the internet and has been described in stories, even real? Did it exist before, or did whoever created this grand ruse also simply create a backstory? Did you ever see the movie Catfish? I wonder what happened to all those old accounts. All those people, they were so close in their little community of friends. They had all those important interactions and experiences with one another. Of course, none of them were actually real, but if we were told today that they were setting themselves on fire outside of the filming location for Law and Order New York, the loudest hush money, we would go to the internet to research them, and we would find that they have an extensive history online. Is it real? Is it fake? The better question is, does it matter? Is it fake enough that we should ignore it until it becomes something important, until it proves itself to be something important? Or is the point that we learn, discuss, and then argue about all the details of this potentially complete and total fiction? So we have to prioritize what we spend our time on. And one of the tools I use in discerning what to prioritize is whether or not something about what I'm being told immediately stands out as complete and total bullshit. Like if you tell me that the quote unquote former president is inside a building in New York experiencing the first ever criminal trial of a quote unquote former president, and virtually the entire NYPD is around that building protecting the quote-unquote former president, and then you tell me that someone who knew the government was corrupt just a little bit too hard goes and lights himself on fire, I'm going to say, yeah, that sounds like bullshit. Do you want to prove to yourself that it's bullshit? And is that a good expenditure of time if you can just wait around for a couple days and figure out that it's bullshit? And hey, what if it's just not really important at all, whether or not it is bullshit? Do you need to scour the entire internet in order to prove that it's fake? Something that, by the way, you cannot do? No, that would be an extraordinary waste of time to do that every time one of these ridiculous stories comes out. I would argue the most appropriate reaction we could possibly have is to say, yeah, that sounds like bullshit. I think I'm going to keep focusing on those things that I know actually matter. I've already thought about what it is that actually matters, and dramatic news stories about people I did not know existed prior are not on my list of things that matter. I do not actually need to get to the bottom of this. And if it turns out that this story does matter, the downside of my being wrong is extraordinarily low. It would be hard to even imagine a scenario where that could have mattered. So when I see the video of the man setting himself on fire, and then the video of him being put away in the ambulance all green and gray, the EMTs just flopping him onto a stretcher as if they've never done their jobs before, I'm going to assess, hey, that looks like bullshit. And I can understand that it is almost definitely totally irrelevant. Should I then spend a great deal of time researching this fictional narrative so that I can then go and convince other people that it's not real and not important? Do I have that responsibility, or is it sufficient for me to say, yeah, I think that's bullshit and I'm not going to waste my time on it? This has a tendency to make people angry because it has triggered their emotions somehow. It's something jarring, something unusual. They want to know what it is and what it means. Why am I being shown a man setting himself on fire? This doesn't really make sense. This man must have had something deeply wrong with him. I know they're saying he did it because he just knew the government was corrupt a little bit too hard, but there has to be more to it than that. You know what? I'm going to try to figure out everything I can about this guy so that I can pretend like I know him personally. And maybe at some point down the line, I will find myself in a place where I can observe what he's done and find a sense of comfort, knowing that Travis probably set himself on fire because he listened to too much Marilyn Manson. Some people can't get past this. They get manipulated into forming an emotional attachment to a story. They've been sucked in by the drama. They want to see how it ends. And that sort of thing is exciting. It's interesting. It's a form of entertainment. And they don't want someone to ruin their good time. They're very invested and they want to see people talk about it. It's similar to how you might have a successful podcast that on the podcast, they discuss the Kardashians, like the reality show. There are people addicted to following the Kardashians, and then they'll become addicted to listening to someone talk about the Kardashians. They want to know everything about it. This is like that, except this has the illusion of some higher importance. People don't want to talk about the actually important subjects because eventually those get uncomfortable. So it's easier to talk about the guy who evaded all of New York's finest in order to set himself on fire outside of Trump's fake trial. Some people are triggered by that. But for the most part, people are like, okay, I get it. It's a weird situation. It probably doesn't matter at all. I can see why it's not worth devoting a whole lot of time to. But the strong negative reaction to saying something's bullshit and moving on is increased 100-fold when the issue, to the extent it's real, could have a profound impact in the world. Or even when the narrative itself can have a profound impact in the world. For instance, paragliding go-karts flew over the most well-secured border in the history of the world and then slaughtered 1,200 people. Now, the people who were defending that border and defending those 1,200 people ostensibly all knew it was going to happen and no one did anything. And if you don't believe that, well, then A couple days later, we're going to tell you about a bunch of decapitated babies and babies thrown in ovens. And at that point, you're going to have to believe it, because if you say that we are lying, we are going to say that you're a monster and you will be ostracized in every social situation for the rest of your life. And if we end up debanking you, well, hey, we told you what to say. How hard was it to just go ahead and say it? How hard was it to go ahead and agree that things happened exactly like you were told? Well, people get a lot angrier in that situation. In that situation, you're supposed to devote a lot of your time to each and every minute detail, so that when you come down on the side you were already on before the event ever happened, you'll at least be able to tell people in depth why you're not racist or something, because that is what these conversations end up being. But this is when you have to remember where all of the information you're receiving is coming from. And when you understand that it's all coming to you from that drunk trying to get into the bar, that pathological liar who lies constantly, specifically to manipulate you, then your skepticism has to be turned on completely from the very beginning. And that instinct should only grow sharper when they tell you things like this man has evaded all the cops in New York to set himself on fire in front of a fake trial, or paragliding go-karts just flew over the most heavily secured border in world history. And yes, they knew that they were going to be attacked, but they did absolutely nothing to stop it. In fact, they allowed it to continue for hours while the go-kart riders indiscriminately slaughtered everyone in attendance at a music festival that had just been moved to that location 2 days before. Now, if you are a pathological liar who is lying intentionally in order to manipulate me and exploit me, and then you tell me an absolutely preposterous story where the likelihood of it being true in all its elements is basically zero, then I'm going to understand what you have just shown me as part and parcel of that manipulation. And I'm going to take a few steps back. I'm not going to give you the benefit of the doubt and say, oh, it must be true. You would never lie to me about these sorts of things. Sure, you would lie to me about the guy setting himself on fire in front of Trump's fake trial on an issue that is now 7 years old, based only on lies the entire time from, by the way, the same exact people. But you would never, ever, ever lie to me about these paragliding go-karters. What's that you say? It's Israel's 9/11? Well, you see, that proves it. They would never lie about 9/11 either. Therefore, you know, both are true, and now Israel gets to glass the desert. Now, I don't know what's happening over there. I suspect there's some level of conflict. Is some special forces unit of the good twin faction of the Israeli people clearing out the infrastructure of some global regime-linked terrorist organization? I guess maybe that's possible. You have to allow for the possibility, but you also have to allow for the possibility that the entire area is being devastated and people are being forced to flee from their homes so that the Ben Gurion Canal project can finally become a reality after 60 years of planning. Do I know that's what's happening? No, of course not. I couldn't possibly know that. But if you're going to tell me that the whole paragliding go-karts thing was real and so devastating that the Israeli Defense Forces are allowed to go next door and kill people nonstop for 7 months, well, there's no way I'm going to side with that. But even at that point, you are into the weeds. Wherever you want to go forward from there is going to require you to base your decision and your reasoning on a whole range of facts you simply cannot know to be true. And your reaction, the substance of your reaction, will be the decision whether or not to support an agenda that will absolutely lead to the killing of innocent people, maybe thousands and thousands of them, on behalf of the same global regime who is our enemy, and the growth and strengthening of the global war machine that at this point, with their fiat currency collapsing, is just about the only thing that keeps them in whatever power they still have. So that issue, to the extent it's real, is certainly very important, but at the same time, we have no way of knowing enough about the situation to determine whether or not wars should be fought over it. Didn't we learn our lesson on this a couple years ago? In Ukraine, it's different now because it's Israel and not Ukraine. And of course, on some level, we all understand that we can't know all the details about this situation. It's on the other side of the world. There's all sorts of propaganda in any war scenario. There's all sorts of propaganda anyway. There's censorship all over the place. There are social incentives within the party of false decorum at each and every link in the chain, from how that situation on the ground gets transmitted ultimately to us. But we figure someone must know. Someone's investing all this time. They know the details about all these situations. They know what's really going on there. Listen to how long they're able to discuss it. But that's not true either. And most people just consume that stuff so that they feel more empowered to assert the opinions they were already asserting, no matter what's going on there. The fact that the inciting incident makes no sense and was shown to us in a way that would be guaranteed to make no sense means that the primary motivation above all else is to make something extremely divisive so that each side is willing to completely annihilate the other while something else is going on in the background. Because just like with the college protests, they set up the controlled opposition. They put you on one side or the other, and then they will just consistently manipulate you until the jig is ultimately up. When you're shown a bunch of things that are extraordinarily unlikely, if not impossible, and you're told stories about those things in a way that makes it seem crazy to recognize how crazy the story is, you should understand you're being gaslit and you should step back from the story. You can even look at this in a positive way. Someone is giving you a little wink. They're giving you a little clue to say, hey, don't fall for this. It puts the question in your mind from the first moments. And you say, hey, I am going to emotionally detach. I'm going to exercise extreme skepticism here because I feel like maybe it's a bad idea, the sort of thing I don't want to have on my soul, to support an agenda that's going to lead to the indiscriminate killing of thousands of people based on how upset I am about what I saw on TV. And I'm suggesting that regardless of the importance, we need to react to the stories of these events in the same way. Not because there's some particular clue about the story that we can easily detect, but because they both have the same result when we apply the same strict epistemology in a consistent way. It's about how we form beliefs. Do we admit that we don't know? And upon that admission, do we consider that other possibilities might be true, no matter how well we think we know something? And even more applicably, when we are honest with ourselves about how truly little we know about certain things. Part of that because some of them are ultimately unknowable, but also because most of our beliefs and the ways we've gone about our lives are formed foundationally on information that we simply accepted as true based on who gave it to us. Like yesterday, we talked about how dinosaur juice powers our cars. Now, let's just say that, for instance, we were lied to about the existence of dinosaurs. I don't know whether we were or we weren't, but I do know that if we were lied to about the existence of dinosaurs and dinosaurs never existed, then we're not putting dinosaur juice in our cars. Now, you see, if dinosaurs existed and we are putting dinosaur juice in our cars, well, then it's going to eventually run out because everybody knows that dinosaurs are extinct. So, of course, there would be no more dinosaur juice. If the dinosaur juice is going to run out, that means there is scarcity. Remember hearing about peak oil? They know where all the oil is, and once they tap into it, once we use too much of it, once we run out, well, there just won't be any more. So we need to look for different sources of energy, or else something really terrible is going to happen. And you see, if our energy source is going to run out at some point, that means that it's scarce. And if it's scarce, well, then we can sell it for a whole lot more. Because if we told people, for instance, that dinosaur juice actually didn't come from dinosaurs and was just part of some other organic material that was actually just constantly regenerating somewhere deep below the surface of the earth, well, then the scarcity would go away and the resource would lose value. And it would also turn out that if they're lying, let's say, about the climate change thing and the burning of fossil fuels wasn't destroying the environment, well, then we would simply have an effective renewable resource. And what would that mean for the world's energy supply? What would it mean for geopolitics and the future of war? We're talking about the sort of issue that could potentially be world-changing, and it's held together based on our insistence that dinosaurs definitely existed, and that we know that to be true because otherwise, how could our cars go zoom zoom? And so when people tell me that the truth or falsity of one of these issues doesn't matter, and that we should really be spending all our time figuring out the personal history of the man who evaded every cop in New York to set himself on fire in front of Trump's fake trial, I really have to wonder about the damage being done by this tendency to gatekeep on certain subjects, because that's going to make us look crazy. We're going to look stupid in the eyes of stupid people. Oh no! How will I ever recover? The person who wore 2 masks in their car and then proceeded to take 4 or 5 toxic experimental COVID shots that they knew couldn't protect them from a disease that couldn't kill them, just to trust the science and own the maggots, thinks I'm stupid? They're going to make fun of me to other people I know? I guess this is the end. Again, no one has to venture further than they're comfortable going. Just don't stop other people. Don't default to siding with knowledge from authority and working to convince other people to stay there with you, especially when and where it concerns ideas that you haven't even truly considered yourself. And to truly consider an idea, to give an idea a fair shake, you have to at least work to convince yourself a little bit that the idea is true, or that there's something to it, or that at least you can see why other people believe it even though you don't. And there's a very clear difference in people taking that approach and people telling you, yeah, hey, bro, that's just a black hat psyop designed to make all of us look stupid. Yeah, is it? Well, hey, buddy, here's the thing. You look stupid right now to me, while you're telling me I'm going to look stupid in the eyes of someone wearing 2 masks in their car. But that's not really what's being communicated. What's being communicated is, you shouldn't say that thing because I think it's stupid. And that's all good, but just say it yourself. Don't tell me that you're protecting my image from some attack by an imaginary third party, potentially in the future, if they ever hear what I'm saying, even though they're not listening to me. What does that mean? That's just saying you shouldn't talk about that. But let's recall the discussion yesterday. Either the sun farted in our general direction, or the manipulation of radio frequencies and the heating of the ionosphere was the source of the sky magic, or it was something else, or it was simply an illusion. Well, like I said, I had these conversations over the weekend. I've observed some of the feedback to the podcast that I eventually posted this morning. Apologies on not getting it out last night. And while most people have no issue with the discussion, there are always a few people who get very upset about part of the subject matter, which is whether or not we have been deceived about outer space and our place in the universe that began 14 billion years ago out of nothing through the Big Bang, according to the science. And then, evolution happened right after that. 14 billion years of it, and here we are, creating all sorts of inanimate objects we can have sex with. Hopefully one day we'll bring them to life. Isn't it a scientific miracle? People don't want to think that we've been lied to about any of that, and they most especially don't want to think that we are not attached to a ball forever ellipsing around a gigantic fireball 93 million miles away while we are all just hurtling through this vast and infinite void. Apparently that story is just too inspiring for anyone to let it go. I would suggest that perception in itself suggests a total inversion within the false reality, that we have this unconscious, instinctual urge that we must somehow escape from this planet, this cage that we find ourselves in. And sure, it's a vast, dark, infinite void of pointlessness and nothing that we could never possibly survive in, but golly, it's got to be better than here. I think our real hope is to find life on Mars. And this, we are told, is the source of all wonder and imagination. Without this belief, there would be no wonder and imagination. There would be nothing for us to ever attempt to achieve. Everything of any meaning is out there in that vast, infinite void that not one of us could survive a single second in. Oh, how inspiring. BRB, gonna go write a sonnet. I'll be right back. Now, hey, maybe that's the state of things. Maybe that's how it is. Maybe it's not, but maybe it is. And if it is, I guess it's a little bit weird and maybe deranged to feel like we are somehow stuck in this cage here and that our future as people is probably best lived on another planet. And in order to achieve that inspiring dream, well, we'd better empower the richest and most powerful, most evil people in all of human history to somehow give birth to their false god in AI, figure out how to allow themselves to live forever, and then after that, we're going to build this spacecraft so we can all go live on Mars. I mean, we will have been dead thousands of years before that ever happens. But what a dream, you know what I mean? What wonder, what imagination. There's no way we could come up with something like that without the understanding that our perfect happiness lies somewhere out in that vast and infinite void. Can you feel yourself filled with awe and wonder? I know I can. But here's the thing. Nothing I said yesterday requires the assertion that the earth is flat. The same way it doesn't require the assertion that the earth is round. I don't know what the answer is. I have no way of knowing what the answer is. Even the space people admit that the pictures of the earth taken from space are not real pictures. They're just artist renderings. There's no evidence that men went to the moon. There is evidence that what we were told was evidence was actually just staged. There's no evidence that we've sent rovers to Mars. But none of that matters. All that matters was that the story we were given in advance to frame our understanding of phenomena we might witness was presented as factually true and scientifically unassailable. And once that story was good and baked in and people were really committed to it, then we got another story about who might be performing the sky magic. And that story certainly comes from unreliable sources as well. It just requires a lot fewer unproven and unprovable assumptions to make the assertion. And when both scenarios are unproven and unprovable, our best bet is to simply apply Occam's razor. Which one of these is more simplistic in its plausible explanation for what happened? Which of these has fewer assumptions, particularly more unproven and unprovable assumptions? Well, of the two main explanations, the worldwide array of HARP and HARP-like facilities and technologies causing auroras all over the place in unison requires a hell of a lot fewer assumptions than the whole thing about the sun farting in our general direction, according to sun worshippers. And so let's add in a wrinkle. Many of you have heard me talk about Q and the Q posts before. If you're relatively new to the show, my belief about them, in short, is that they constitute information among other information. The information in the posts and the information acquired as part of the response to the posts maps onto reality in important and useful ways, or it does not. And it turns out that it does. In fact, it helped to spark a mass worldwide movement toward awakening, toward the seeking of truth about difficult subjects, about government, corruption, and criminality, about the state of the world in which we live. People say it's a psyop. Who cares? Everyone admits that it's a psyop. The mainstream media is a psyop. The mainstream media is a psyop that spreads dangerous and destructive conspiracy theories that are absolutely intended to deceive and manipulate you in order to exploit you. The mainstream media is a source of dangerous conspiracy theories. The mainstream media is a dangerous and anti-human psyop. I don't care that Q is a psyop. It makes absolutely no difference at all. And people say, well, what if it's a bad psyop? What if it is a bad psyop? The results are the same either way. It's not a faith-based belief system for me. It's just information among other information. I've written about all of this at length. You can find it. I'm your moderator.substack.com. The series is called A Story About Reality. I've also recorded it and posted it on the podcast, I think mid-September last year. Scroll back, look for A Story About Reality, and you'll hear me reading them. It is information among other information, but go ahead and try this information on for size. Q Post 1328 was posted on May 10th, 2018. So that was 6 years prior to Saturday when people witnessed the sky magic. Now, at the bottom of this Q Post, it says, "We will not be held hostage, sky event." And then where we go, one we go all, and it is signed Q+. Now, in the Q followers' understanding of things, that is not Q sending those messages. In that case, it is Donald Trump sending the messages as Q+. You don't believe it? I don't care. Doesn't matter to me at all. Want to dismiss it? Go right ahead. You might be wrong, but go right ahead. You want to ignore it and mock it and ridicule it while knowing that you might be wrong in the midst of an information war? Well, you're setting yourself up for problems in the event that it proves true. So a 6-year difference to the exact day, there is a post from Q+ that says sky event. Now, anyone who follows Q would know that these sorts of things happen pretty regularly. Some of that could be a result of people's pattern recognition being turned up just a little bit too high. They see the presence of a pattern where there isn't one. Their biases are confirmed, and they lead themselves down a path of poorly formed beliefs based on a lack of discernment in a given situation. You do that too many times, you're probably going to make a lot of bad decisions. Not only is the provenance of this information relatively obscured and ultimately anonymous, the information itself is subject to our own interpretation, so we can't even possibly know if our interpretation is correct. And so again, it's just information among other information. But what's indisputable is that many people throughout the world witnessed what can easily be described as a sky event, and that a Q post mentioned a sky event 6 years ago. Now, if the sun farted in our general direction, and we know that the science can't even really detect these except with models and various intelligence agencies simply making things up, but don't worry, the math checks out, then we can be fairly certain that a conspiracy theory on the internet definitely cannot predict down to the exact day a solar flare 6 years in advance. It's hard to predict anything 6 years in advance. But there are certain things that you can predict 6 years in advance if you make a few assumptions that we have pretty good reason to believe will very likely prove true. For instance, in 6 years, given that I am still alive and that the calendars haven't been changed, I have a very strong chance of accurately predicting that I will celebrate the end of a year and the dawn of a new year in some form or fashion on December 31st. There are a series of things that could happen, that could change between now and then, that may make my prediction ultimately wrong. But barring those, these are the sorts of predictions that we can make fairly reliably. This is why we look out into the future. Now, there are other events that would be much harder to predict. If I was going to say, for instance, that I knew what the score of the Super Bowl that year would be and who was playing in it, most people would think that's just a lucky guess. But if I did the same for every single playoff game too, people would think, wow, does this guy see the future? And if I also did it for every single one of the regular season games and knew, for instance, that one of them would be cut short because one of the players was briefly pronounced dead on the field, that would never happen, don't worry. Well, then no one would think that I was predicting things and no one would think that I got lucky. Everyone would just understand, hey, that guy's controlling the outcome of these games. And I am not saying the NFL is rigged. I would never say that. I'm not a conspiracy theorist like that. Even though I could feel a conspiracy theory just kind of bubbling up, I suppressed it, pushed it right back down. And so the thing is, if the people who follow Q are right, and Q is a real military information operation designed and executed in some way in close partnership with Donald Trump, and whatever that organization was, whatever that collection of people was, they have partners around the world engaged in similar operations and were able to exert a high level of control on future events based on coordinated planning of joint projects set out on a particular timeline, then this would no longer be a prediction or a matter of chance or just good luck to have the phrase sky event have been published exactly 6 years prior to the worldwide coordinated usage of advanced military technology that produces the exact phenomena being discussed. Now, is that the sky event? We don't know. But if you're still hooked on the solar flares, I don't know what to tell you. And so then if you accept, wait a second, this isn't because the sun farted in our general direction. People can produce these phenomena down here on Earth. No outer space required at all. Isn't that worth looking into? Isn't looking into and analyzing that a far better use of time than asking a bunch of scientists and spies under the employ of world-dominating pedophiles? Nope. Why not? Well, you got to protect the space science. You got to say, hey, that's what it is. These guys really know what they're doing. Because if that happens to not be true, and it's obviously not true, well, then we might have to re-examine things. And we wouldn't be able to connect so well with the inspiration we derive from believing that we are just a tiny speck of dust attached to a ball ellipsing around another ball as they both hurtle through a vast infinite void. Now, again, I have no idea what the answers to these questions are. So I don't care what you believe. I'm not going to judge you for it. I understand what it's like to be brainwashed. Maybe I'm still brainwashed about certain things. I try to be really conscious of it. There's going to be things I miss, but I get it. I'm not judging you. We can still be friends. But I'm confused why you're having such a hard time with it. I mean, you are trying desperately to get off this planet, or at least you're hoping that scientists can get you off this planet, or not you, but, people thousands of years in the future. You want someone to have a chance. You got to get out of this cage and into that black infinite void. The last thing you want to do is consider that might not be possible because we're on a flat Earth that isn't in the midst of an infinite void. Isn't it weird somehow to think that if we are on a round Earth, a spherical Earth in an infinite void, at least we kind of know what's around us? Like, sure, it's just more of the infinite void, but at least we know what's there. It's void.
But ladies and gentlemen of this supposed jury, I have one final thing I want you to consider. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Chewbacca. Chewbacca is a Wookiee from the planet Kashyyyk, but Chewbacca lives on the planet Endor. Now think about that. That does not make sense. Damn it.
What?
He's using the Chewbacca defense. Why would a Wookiee, an 8-foot-tall Wookiee, want to live on Endor with a bunch of 2-foot-tall Ewoks? That does not make sense. But more important, you have to ask yourself, what does this have to do with this case? Nothing. Ladies and gentlemen, it has nothing to do with this case. It does not make sense. Look at me. I'm a lawyer defending a major record company, and I'm talking about Chewbacca. Does that make sense? Ladies and gentlemen, I am not making any sense. None of this makes sense. And so you have to remember, when you're in that jury room deliberating and conjugating the Emancipation Proclamation, does it make sense? No. Ladies and gentlemen of this supposed jury, it does not make sense. If Chewbacca lives on Endor, you must acquit. The defense rests.
And the problem is, it doesn't really make sense no matter how you slice it up. If it's the way that it was always taught to us, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. If it's not like that, doesn't really make sense that way either. You know what I know about the situation for sure? I don't know the answer. That's what I know. I know what we can observe with our own eyes, with our own senses. Observations that don't require models or mathematics. Not that models or mathematics could ever be informative, but either way, we can't know for sure. And one of those answers, via Occam's razor, has a whole lot fewer unproven and unprovable assumptions that must be true in order for the rest to be true. But we're told not to consider that answer. That answer is a rejection of science, and a rejection of science is a rejection of wonder and inspiration. We should want to float off into that great black nothingness in search of, really anything. Just anything to escape this cage here on Earth. Not a cage, just this planet. This planet is unsuitable somehow. Climate change. I know that's not real. There's got to be some other reason why this planet is unsuitable. What we need to do is chart a course toward Mars. But it's not because we're in a cage, and it's not because we're enslaved here. Sure, we are enslaved and we can't get out. But, that doesn't mean the Earth is flat. Yeah, okay, well, yeah, that's a great point. That does not mean the Earth is flat. That definitely means the people enslaving us probably didn't tell us the truth. But hey, maybe it doesn't matter. And regardless, we should never accept what those crazy flat Earth people say. They say the Earth is flat and not round. And that makes no sense, just a flat Earth spinning around. That gigantic death ray 93 million miles away. But wait a second, that's not really the model either. Now, I'm not here to take a side on one side of that argument or another, because I know that I can't know. But I also know that I explored why it upset me to think the thing that I always believed might be wrong. Not that it is, just that it might be. And that's because this is one of those basic fundamental claims that is used as a test of whether or not you are a smart or serious person. You don't want to be one of them science deniers. Sure, you'll be a climate denier because climate change is obviously bullshit. And you're down to be a vaccine denier because vaccines are obviously bullshit. And you're down to be a transgender denier because transgender is obviously bullshit. And you might even be willing to be a virus denier because, hey, there's not that much to it. At best, you might even be a nuke denier just because there's absolutely no proof that they were ever used or ever existed and that normal life resumed rather quickly where they were said to have been used. But you're not going to be a globe denier. That's for stupid people. You have to draw the line right before that, and you can never draw it after that. And the funny thing is that they have one of these issues like every few years, and they just change between them. I remember back in the early 2000s, in the heyday of the new atheist movement, the major issue was whether or not you believed in Darwinian evolution. And if you didn't, well, then you were a science denier. You were one of those dumb Christians who's choosing to believe what it says in that old book rather than this other unproven and unprovable pseudoscientific theory from some deranged elitist sociopath in a Prussian death cult. If you want to claim that there was never any God, then you need some inciting incident, like let's say the Big Bang 14 billion years ago, and then you need some way to get us from that to being the sort of creatures that could create inanimate objects to have sex with. And that, my friends, is evolution. That's natural selection. And of course, we did Al Gore and global warming, and we did whether or not people were born gay. We changed global warming to climate change. We changed the born gay thing to whether or not you were even born as a man or a woman. We now have to ask biologists so that we can know the answer to the most basic question in all of natural history. One, by the way, that seeks to invert the human origin story and replace it with a different, more, satanic one. And then we had the very deadly pandemic, and then we had the vaccines. All of these, you could either trust the science and trust the experts, or you could be a science denier. And if you were a science denier, then you were mocked and ridiculed and you were called a conspiracy theorist. You were a bad person for even doubting the science. And did the science turn out to be right about any of that? No, it sure didn't. Did they all get paid a whole lot throughout that time? Yeah. Did a lot of their friends get paid a whole lot to advance that global regime's agenda and help them continue to amass and acquire all the power and wealth and status they could ever dream of acquiring? Yeah, it did. And in the meantime, it convinced a lot of curious and confused people not to actually seek any of the answers. All of that was related to the incentive and punishment structure within the party of false decorum. What sorts of mistakes have we made going along with all of this? What problems have been caused? What problems could have been avoided? And what could we have actually discovered if we hadn't spent all our time learning, discussing, and arguing over the details of complete and total fictions just because they were claimed to be true by the scientists and enforced with dogma and consensus? The sum total of all the information received from the authoritative source and then to remain forever unquestioned. Why would it scare anyone to consider that we might have been lied to about this realm in which we exist in a physical form? Because that's what it is. If it's the way we were taught in school, we have this planet alone, as far as we know, alone in the universe, very likely never to come into contact with anyone not immediately from here. Although we kind of have this suspicion that there is something outside, even though it's mostly a void. And we do hope to no longer be trapped in here. I mean, what is the difference between that and the meaning of what flat earthers believe? I don't spend a lot of time on it, but I'm pretty sure that what they think is that we are on this kind of enclosed plane with a dome overhead that they generally believe to be the firmament as described in the Bible. That too would essentially mean that we are in here in a cage, and there might be other sorts of beings or creatures outside of that, but that we will probably never find out. And I think maybe this is the real difference, because they are so similar in meaning ultimately. In the view where we are on a spherical earth orbiting around a sun in a vast, infinite void, we think, okay, we're stuck here. We're never going to see anyone else. But within this space, we are all equal and free. There are only humans born more or less just like us, and we can compete within a meritocracy. Some people have a head start, but we're all kind of roughly equal in some sense. We're all having a common human experience. Okay, cool. Got it. That's true in the other sense as well, except in the other sense, there's also the possibility that there are places on this earth that we are not allowed to go, that we are barred from going. We are enclosed in a different way, and parts of this place are just off limits to us. Okay, well, you know what? It's already like that too. Resist the urge to tell me that there are Antarctic cruises and then just spend a few minutes researching Antarctica and whether or not you're allowed to go find out what's down there. Or let's make it less esoteric. What's in all those tunnels under the ground throughout the world that have been there for thousands of years? There are plenty of places on this planet that we are not allowed to go. So in terms of derived meaning, both views end up in very similar places. One of them requires far fewer leaps in terms of assumptions. We are able to apply a far more consistent epistemology in one of those cases, but we are told to do that is to deny the beauty and complexity of the science, because the science is what fills us with wonder and inspiration. It's what allows us to go outside and look at the night sky and think about how much better life might be 374 million miles away as we drift through a black and infinite void. Ah, the inspiration and wonder. Hey, son, why don't you take out your cell phone and snap a picture of the sky? You'll see that the thing that we are looking at is actually filled with really pretty colors if you just look at it through something else. What kind of monster would want to take away that wonder and inspiration. But here's the thing. What if instead of trying to escape this very spherical cage into the black, vast, infinite void of outer space, we attempted to figure out whether wonder and inspiration could exist just right here on our planet, too? I mean, we just had an unexplained sky event over the weekend. There's at least some substantial reason to believe it was caused by man. And even those crazy flat earthers understand that the sky is real and that you can go up into it and that that's where the satellites are. So why in the world are we devoting so much time to supporting the view that the sun farted in our general direction? It's because people understand the error that was made by the science and the communication channels of the science as a new massive glitch in the matrix was exposed over the weekend. People are freaking out because they are beginning to understand that the toothpaste ain't going back in the tube. They told people that solar flares from a solar storm 93 million miles away, a coronal mass ejection, was going to come here and make the sky beautiful. And then everyone found out, oh, wait, the same sorts of scientists were going to turn on a bunch of machines that made the sky beautiful. And we're being told that it's coming in from 93 million miles away. What else are these space people lying about? It makes no sense to get mad at me for this. That's what happened. No matter how you feel about it, that's what happened. That is the reaction that people had. The end of wonder and inspiration comes with the claim from the science that the science is settled. If this has anything to do with the building of the next generation of the worldwide infrastructure for the transmission of energy and communications, for the future of national defense, all of that is more interesting than solar flares. We're listening to people tell us what's deep in outer space, and we don't even know what is up in our own sky above us, which is strange because what's up there is far more interesting and far more important. But nope, we can't think about that, because we're worried that we might be called stupid by stupid people. All right, tomorrow is Wednesday. That means we will be doing the live stream on Rumble. I will be sending the link out on Substack. That live stream will begin at 3 p.m. Eastern. You are welcome to submit your questions, your comments, articles. Someone reminded me that I said I would take an article I've never read before about really almost any given subject that is relevant, and then go through an article, as I do when I'm trying to analyze the material and derive the proper meaning from what's being communicated. So I hope that you are a paid subscriber and you will join the live stream and interact, ask your questions. But as far as the normal podcast goes, I will be back on Thursday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under $0.25 per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com, and you can find everything else by heading to Linktree, linktree.com/I'm your moderator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's happening!